I need you to bear with me because for the next 20 seconds, I'm not going to talk about art. And don't worry, this will all make sense in a minute. But I need to now talk about USC football. And specifically, I want to talk about the golden age in the storied football program's history, the 1960s. The decade started with the hiring of head coach John McKay, who would go on to win 4 national championships. Under his leadership, the Spartans produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners, Mike Garrett and O.J. Simpson. It was McKay's team that played the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, becoming the first fully integrated team to play in that state. And they crushed the all-white Crimson Tide 42-21, hastening the racial integration of football teams at Alabama and throughout the Deep South. And why am I even talking about this? Because there was one player who didn't just go to USC to try and win a national championship. He went to the University of Southern California to study art, and the fact that they happened to have a kick-ass football team was just icing on the cake. And remember, this was a time when abstract expressionism was just starting to fall out of favor, and new movements like minimalism were becoming ever more popular. So what happens when you mix a football player with a dash of abstraction, a pinch of minimalism, and top it off with the turmoil of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement? Well, you get Mel Edwards, so I thought we should talk about him. Art lovers, welcome back to the channel. My name is Christopher West, and this is the place where we talk all things modern and contemporary art and design. And today I want to talk about a really fascinating artist, Mel Edwards. And the football thing is a really interesting place to start. And don't worry, this will be the last time I mention football. But Mel saw the sport as something different than certainly I do as a casual viewer on television. Where I see a bunch of grown men beating the crap out of each other, he saw something much more cerebral. To him, this was a game decided by inches, not yards, where the participants often memorized hundreds of plays and variations of those plays. And those plays were not designed in some sort of 3D computerized graphics program. They were written on a page or drawn up on a blackboard. And then those drawings had to be interpreted in 3 dimensions. See where I'm going with this? So early on, although he was making art in 2 dimensions on paper or canvas, he was able to quickly move on to his real passion, sculpture. Probably his best-known works are from a series called Lynch fragments. He started this series in the early 1960s. This was not long after the lynching of Emmett Till, and around the time Ralph Ginsberg self-published his book, 100 Years of Lynching. The horrors of what was happening in the South and throughout this country were finally becoming more well-known to a broader public. So Edwards would incorporate tools and other objects, like chains, axe heads, and locks, to create these wall-hung 3-dimensional objects. This work was in part inspired by the modernists Julio Gonzalez and David Smith. But the work's charged titles, his choice of objects used within the sculpture, and their intimate scale, some of these measure less than a foot in any direction, forced us, the viewer, to confront these atrocities. And to put this into context, the same year Edwards started this series, the Museum of Modern Art was featuring exhibitions by Emil Nolde and Hans Hofmann. Not to discount the work by Nolde or Hofmann, but it's pretty easy to see that what Edwards was doing was radical. And it wouldn't take long for the broader art world to take notice. In 1967, Edwards moved to New York and began participating in group exhibitions at places like Stony Brook and the Studio Museum in Harlem. He had put a pause on making his Lynch fragments and started working with barbed wire. And it was this work that actually inspired this video. When we think of barbed wire, the first visual that probably comes to mind is keeping livestock contained. But this material takes on a completely different meaning when we think of the concentration camps in Namibia in the early 20th century or the Jewish concentration camps of World War II. And he thought about using barbed wire for outdoor sculptures, but ultimately decided that was too close to the original use. So when he moved these sculptures inside, there was a radical transformation. The artist and educator William T. Williams asked Edwards to participate in a group exhibition at the Studio Museum. It was here he installed Pyramid Up and Down Pyramid, the first piece he created using barbed wire. And this work caught the attention of curator Robert Doty, who asked Edwards if he would do a solo show of his work at the Whitney Museum in 1970. And it wasn't like museums were really giving shows to black artists at this time. In fact, it was just a year prior, in 1969, when the Whitney Museum gave a show to Al Loving, the first black artist to ever have a solo show at the Whitney. And there's not much documentation I could find about this show. The footage you're seeing here is from an installation I recently visited at the Dia Art Foundation's museum in Beacon, New York. And it was the first time I had seen his barbed wire pieces. I imagine my initial reaction in 2024 was very similar to what people felt in 1970. An artist I completely admire, David Hammons, may have said it best after seeing Edwards' first show at the Whitney. That was the first abstract piece of art that I saw that had a cultural value in it for black people. I couldn't believe that piece when I saw it because I didn't think you could make abstract art with a message. And at 87 years old, Edwards is still making art today. He has gallery representation in London and New York, and you can now see his work in museums from Los Angeles to Dallas, Chicago, Detroit, DC, London, and every place in between. If you want his work to be a part of your life every day, his sculptures at auction can run from $20,000 to $30,000 up into the six figures. But his prints can be had for just a few thousand. There are a few things I will need in my life as soon as YouTube pays me like $1 quadrillion. One is a painting by Ed Ruscha, a Louise Bourgeois spider, and a sculpture by Mel Edwards. I hope you all enjoyed this. I'm getting close to 10,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already done so, please do me a solid, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Ciao!